Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Monday office hour. This is the last week of the course. We won't be shutting down the Jupyter Hub this week. The plan is to shut it down next week on Monday. The lecture videos for this week are recorded, and directly after this office hour, I will be uploading them to YouTube. And one of the videos this week will be covering concluding the course and how you should prepare for the shutdown of the Jupyter Hub and how you might continue your education beyond this course. Quite a lot of questions over the weekend, it appears. All right. And as usual, if you have any questions to share with me live, please do so in the chat. It doesn't appear anyone's joined me for this office hour. So in the interim between any questions in the live chat, I will be answering questions from the message board. And I'll start with some of the questions about kind of like technical issues. I always like to get those out of the way first. So we've gotten emails from several people, as we've gotten emails throughout the course, about problems connecting to their servers. This is normal and expected. Last weekend, so the first thing we have to understand is there's two parts to your actual experience connecting to your server. There's the Jupyter Hub, located at w3uds.tditrain.com. And then there's your personal server, or pod, as we call them. Notice this URL contains hub, and this one contains user. So the Jupyter Hub has not experienced any prolonged downtime since last weekend, when it was down for the entire weekend. You should have not experienced any difficulty connecting to the Jupyter Hub landing page. If you did, that would indicate the hub crashed, which I know it didn't from reviewing our logs. Or that you were personally experiencing some kind of network trouble. However, your pod may crash from time to time. The system is designed to automatically recover from such crashes. This shutdown and recovery process takes some time. If after 15 to 60 minutes, you're still experiencing problems launching or connecting to your pod, please email esmodule@wqu.org. And we will manually restart the pod. As a note, every single email we've received over the last week about people not being able to connect to their server has been a case where the server crashed and automatically recovered without any manual intervention. In many cases, the problem will resolve itself if you just wait a little while. I realize dealing with crashes is irritating. But we're doing our best to eliminate problems that can increase the frequency of crashes. And at the moment, some crashes are simply unavoidable. We appreciate your patience. So, for example, like someone asked this question, a few hours later, someone replied, and then they said 10 minutes later that theirs was working. So yeah, this is an example of like, we did nothing to intervene for this person. It just automatically started working again. So just a little patience. Sometimes you'll find that the problem resolves itself. Okay, someone appears to be maybe missing data. My guess is there was a very similar question to this in the past. My guess is that they unzipped this file. This may have been a question that I answered only in oh yeah. So this was a question I think I answered in office hours. So looking at their data, yep, they unzipped this file, so it's not there. Simple enough. I checked your directory on your server, and yelp.json is present. My guess is that you did unzip yelp.json.gz, which unzips the yelp.json.gz file into yelp.json. If you would like to work with the gzipped version, you should do gzip yelp.json. You can also work with yelp.json instead. Doesn't matter. It is important to be able to inspect your file system, your files, and get some idea of what's going on with them. In this case, it's a good idea to simply look at the data directory and see if any file named with a name similar to yelp.json.gz exists. You would find yelp.json and maybe be able to guess what happened. So this is like my typical advice, which is like, if something's going wrong like this, put in a little work to try and figure out what's going wrong. All you would need to do is look in this directory for a file like the thing you're trying to access, and then think about it for a little while. You should not encounter error messages and throw up your hands and give up. You should encounter an error message and say, oh, this is giving me some information about what's wrong. Apparently this file doesn't exist. Well, let's go to this directory and see what files do exist. Yeah. Always a good idea if, so it says here empty data error, actually, which I didn't notice the first time. And maybe they only, yeah, they updated this question to include that. Notice at the top of your error message, it says empty data error. It sounds like data did not download properly. So re-downloading the data, as suggested in this answer, sounds like a good idea. So if you're having trouble loading in data for a mini project, again, like it's a good idea to just simply like have a look at the files in your directory. So for example, for the DW mini project, you want files that have greater than 0 size, for instance. So even if you see like, if you see the file doesn't exist, that's obviously a problem. But if you see the file exists, but it has 0 bytes as the size, that's also a problem, right? 0 bytes means there's nothing in there. So if you encounter a problem like that, you may just want to run those cells that download the data again. You may need to first delete these files in order for them to re-download. Oh, hey, some live questions. Great. When a kernel crashes or dead, what's the best way to recover work? How should we handle this in a professional work environment where data sets are large? If a kernel crashes or dies, there's no real way to recover your work other than rerunning your code. If the kernel dies, any names stored in memory are lost. So you'll have to rerun your code, defining any variables you need, any functions you need, etc. And that's the only way to handle that, regardless of whether you're in a professional environment or not. The only things you can do are try and mitigate your exposure to that risk. So for example, if you have taken a data set and done some work with it, and you have some intermediate result that's going to be useful, and you don't want to risk losing that you don't want to have to go through recalculating that intermediate result, you can save that to disk. You can pickle it to disk. And pickle files are great for checking in your work in case of kernel failure, right? These pickle files are very easy to load back in and reconstruct the exact object you were working with. Another thing you can do, though it's quite a bit more advanced, we don't cover it at all. In fact, in either Unit 1 or Unit 2, is there are distributed computing environments where all the processing and all the data handling is distributed among different nodes in a redundant and robust fashion, so that if individual nodes fail, your calculations kind of don't suffer for it. But that's a much more advanced answer and is not very applicable for kind of like everyday data analysis, but is applicable to your like specific question about what about when data sets are really large. Is it possible to include descriptions on the office hour videos? I, in principle, could. However, the reason I don't is because the office hours are often very scattered. And so there's not usually like themes per se. Usually it's just like answering a bunch of random questions. I can try to add descriptions for the office hours. I just don't know that they'll be very good or very helpful. But I can give it a try. I'd like to ask about z-scores. What mean and standard deviation should I use? Calculated as a mean for groups or mean for the raw underlying data? Well, there's two means in a z-score, right? There's x bar, which is our sample mean, and then there's mu, which is our null hypothesis mean. So are you referring to x bar or mu? Bikram, tags are not really a different problem. The tags apply, everything I said applies as well to tags as to a description. The issue I'm talking about is like, how do I summarize, whether in tags or a description, what goes on in an office hour? And since like office hours are very scattered and like the questions are sort of random in a way, there's not necessarily like a great way to summarize it into topics. That's all I'm saying. I will try. I'm just saying that I don't know that it'll be all that helpful. I'm just expressing some doubts. Creating checkpoints only saves the notebook. That's correct. It doesn't save your interpreter session in any kind of way. Incidentally, there are questions on the message board about calculating z-scores. And if you search a little bit for like DW z-scores, I'm sure you can find them. So yeah, there's quite a few questions here. I'm not going to look through all of them, but I have no doubt that you can find some guidance in these questions about calculating the z-score. In fact, I know in some questions, students say like, here's how I go about calculating the z-score. And their approach is like very reasonable and good. So for example, here, proportion of practices, prescriptions with respect to all prescriptions minus each practice's proportion of opioids. And then I say like, I don't quite understand this, but then I give some explanation. So just looking through the results of that search could be useful. So I'm just going to add a note to this question. So this question is asking about asking what am I doing wrong on question 3? And as someone points out, it looks like they're not deduplicating their practices to, since there are practices that have multiple postal codes associated with them. But as a side note, 0.86 is a good score. You don't need a 1.0 on every question. In fact, to get an honors distinction, you only need a 0.9 score on average. However, to complete the course and receive a certificate at all, you must complete every question. Therefore, it is probably better to spend your time working on questions you haven't yet answered than to spend your time trying to perfect a 0.86 to a 1.0. In general, this is good advice along the lines, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. In other words, if you have a solution that works well enough, move on to a problem that does not have a solution. Yeah, so I know some people like are cycling back and trying to improve their score on questions that now that they've answered all of them, but I just want to include that almost as like a disclaimer on any question that's like, I'm trying to get a 1.0 and I'm currently at like 0.94 or something like that. I just want to, I see a lot of students make the mistake of what's called premature optimization, where they're trying to perfect something that's already working pretty well. And their time would be better spent working on things that don't work at all. So yeah, there are some typos in some places. Some of them are already fixed. I appreciate that students bring these to my attention. But just because we fixed them does not mean that we can easily push those updates to you. Because we can't easily like just edit files that are on your machine. And since you've all already done work on these, or not all, but since many of you are already working on this mini project, there's no easy way to just like change the instructions in the notebook that you're working on. So I'm not saying this in my answer, but the thing that they actually need here is probably not the sum, which they presumably already have, but the problem that they're most likely really facing is trying to select the BNF name and item total that is the maximum item total. My guess is that's going to be their main struggle here. Not calculating the sum, which they've presumably already done. Um, this is not the right. Uh, so as this other suggests, you want to make sure that you aren't duplicating descriptions due to duplicate practice codes in practices. However, beyond that, your calculation plan doesn't answer the question correctly. We want the BNF name with the maximum item total in a given postal code. meaning not just one prescription with the maximum amount of items, but the BNF name with the largest sum of items across prescriptions in a given postal code. Therefore, we should not be calculating this, which gives us a single prescription per postal code with the maximum number of items. We should be first calculating a sum of items grouped by both postal code and BNF name, and then calculating a max of that sum grouped by postal code. This is, in fact, the exact same logic as we use for PW question 4. Only now implemented in pandas. Some postal codes have multiple BNF name with the same prescription rate for the maximum. It may be the case that a postal code has multiple maximums. For example, imagine I calculated the following item totals for postal code A87BQ4, 3, whatever. Both aspirin and penicillin achieve the maximum value. How should I choose between them? I'll take the alphabetically first BNF name, aspirin. So this student mentioned that they didn't ask for help for a week because they were afraid to avoid or afraid to repeat a question someone else had asked. Don't wait a week to ask for help. Just what you should do before asking a question is search the message board using a search term related to your question. It can be something broad, like just VC3, or it can be something specific. But if you don't find anything relevant looking through the search results, and actually look through them, open up questions, read through the questions. If you don't find anything relevant, ask a question. Don't wait. Um, your code for mul is doesn't implement either scalar multiplication, e.g., c times point xy to point cxcy, or an inner product, e.g., point x1 y1 times point x2 y2 to x1 times x2 plus y1 times y2. Instead, your mul method implements something that looks almost like if we were multiplying together two fractions, which is not appropriate for any kind of multiplication against a point object. You'll need to update your implementation of mul here. The rest of your class definition looks okay. So now I know also this isn't an init object, this is an int object. The reason you're encountering an error is because in your formula for mul, if target is an integer, then you're trying to access the X attribute of an integer, which makes no sense. E.g., what is 5? What is the X value of 5? What is the Y value of 8? Only point objects have X and Y attributes. So there's a lot of strangeness going on in this code, beginning with this. If we want to call fields keys and data vowels, then we should just have this be vowels and keys. And if we are comfortable with data and fields, then we shouldn't create new names for these variables. There's like just no benefit to doing this whatsoever in any circumstance, basically. Then we create a set of keys and then a dictionary with the same set of keys, but an empty list. And then we create another dictionary, which I presume is the exact same as this dictionary. I've never actually used this before, so I'm not entirely certain. But yeah, I think this should be the same as this. And we don't do anything with group vowels. Then we again create the same dictionary again. Finally, it's not until the end of the cell outside the function where you actually do the grouping by apportioning the data to each group. Let's make some revisions during this part. You overwrite the empty lists with script items every time you encounter a new key, which means that the value is now an integer rather than a list, so you cannot append further items to it. You shouldn't be encountering new keys because you already initialized them. But since you're only using BNF name as a key, the string BNF name as a key rather than a tuple BNF name blah, you are encountering new keys. Some simple revisions. First, to clean up the code, and then you solve your problem. Okay, so first of all, let's get rid of these. They're not doing anything for us. Secondly, okay, fields. So now I'll have to change all these things to fields. That's okay. I'm going a little bit over. This is the last question I'm going to answer. I don't need this. I don't need this. I don't need this. I don't need this. I can just return group vals. I don't need this. And we should move this inside the function. Whoops. And since we pre-populated everything, we don't actually need this check either. We can just go ahead and add or append items because we already know the keys are going to be in the dictionary. That was the whole point of initializing the dictionary. But we'll need two versions of this, one here and one in the case that we only have a single key. This is a big improvement as it eliminates a lot of redundancies and moves the grouping inside the function. However, it's not very general because we can only handle if fields contains one or two keys exactly. And we duplicate code for these two cases. Instead, we'd like to be able to handle any number of fields with a single implementation. So what we could do is we can probably achieve this by doing an iteration over fields. So we'll get rid of this if statement. And we'll say here couple also we need, oh yeah, this is fine. So script field for field in fields. I believe this should work. Let's just see. Yep. Then we can just use this exact thing again down here. Great. So we were able to condense this way down, and I think this should work. I haven't tested it, so I haven't tested this code, and I don't remember what the code I wrote to do this looks like. But this is generally the idea of what we would do. Okay, so I went about 10 minutes over answering that question. There was a lot of questions I didn't get to, but I'll come back tomorrow and answer some more. All right. I will be adding a description to this office hour. I've got to look back through what I answered, I guess, and try and pick out what I addressed. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.